Hey everyone, and welcome to Action for Assange. I am your host, Misty Winston. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the recent situation with Jeremy Lafredo in Israel. Obviously, most of you are probably aware of what's been going on over the past 2 or 3 days with him. But I have a guest journalist, Kit Clarenberg here, who has himself experienced some very similar sets of circumstances. But we wanted to come on and have this conversation. Kit, thank you for joining me. We do have good news. It does appear that Jeremy has been released from jail. So that is at least something. I believe that, and I think Kit agrees that the public outcry, I know that a lot of you yesterday, and thank you for doing it, spent a lot of time making phone calls, sending emails, making noise on Twitter. I think that that was probably a significant push. I think it added some pressure. So thank you for doing that. But he has in fact been released from jail. So that is good news. But we still wanted to come on because it's not over yet. So Kit, can you tell everybody where the situation stands now, what we're looking at, and what Jeremy is facing currently?
Yeah, sure. So just as a bit of background, earlier this week, Jeremy, who is a 28-year-old US citizen fearless independent journalist who's been reporting on the genocide in Gaza in real time, frequently traveling to Israel from New York. But so earlier this week, he was scooped up along with a number of other independent reporters who were traveling through the West Bank, which is under heavy illegal military occupation. He got stopped at a checkpoint. He and his compatriots were beaten, blindfolded, thrown in an Israeli dungeon without contact with the outside world or access to lawyers. His compatriots were released, I think, within a few hours. He's still there, but he was kept in, it seems like solitary confinement for, with limited access to the outside world, to say the least, ever since. Now, there was a major escalation yesterday when the police formally charged Jeremy with national security offences, namely aiding and abetting an enemy for his factual reporting. Now, the charges that were laid against him are very, very, very serious in Israel. We just need to think of Mordechai Vanunu, who was the Israeli whistleblower who exposed how Israel had an illegal nuclear program in the 1980s. He's still in jail now, with totally cut off from the outside world. It's very, very frightening. Even the head of a local NGO in Israel called Bat Shelem, which documents abuses by the Zionist entity authorities against the Palestinians. The head of that organization, an Israeli Jew, she gave a speech at the United Nations Security Council earlier this year, talking about Israeli war crimes against Palestinians. There were calls from the ruling Likud party, this is Netanyahu's party, for her to be formally prosecuted under the same offences as Jeremy, and there was talk of her getting life imprisonment or the death penalty for giving a speech. Now, the positive news is that those charges seem to have been dismissed by an Israeli magistrate, and yes, Jeremy has been released. The downside of this, however, is that he's still under police investigation, and the police have been given, I think it's about 10 days. These are October 20th until October 20th to level new charges based on total access to everything on his phone. Jeremy was repeatedly ordered to hand over his passcodes for his electronic devices, and he did not comply. But the Israelis apparently, according to a police spokesperson, have found a way round this. So, and yes, his passport has been confiscated, and as far as I know, his contact with his family, friends, and collaborators is extremely limited, if not non-existent. But so a mild cause for optimism. And I do think, as you mentioned, Misty, that I think that what was really, really, really crucial here, and may well have at least partially spurred his release, it was the absolutely massive pushback from individuals the world over, concerned citizens who bombarded the State Department, the US Embassy in Israel, and their elected representatives with emails demanding Jeremy's release, demanding an official statement on his incarceration. I might add that at his hearing, there were US Embassy officials allegedly present in the court. They said nothing about this publicly. So, I mean, I made this point on Twitter, and I think it bears repeating. In local media reporting on Jeremy's detention, it was acknowledged that this, because Jeremy is a US citizen, this could create a quote-unquote international incident between the US and Israel. So, I mean, I said, well, let's make that international incident happen, and we did. And it may well have played some role in the decision to release it, because it was truly shocking. And I might add that what he was, I mean, this is something that we all actually need to be concerned about more generally, wherever we are in the West. Jeremy reported on things that mainstream Western news networks did. So he was filming from the site of Iran's missile attacks on October 1st, which was military and intelligence installations. There were PBS news crews. There were local journalists who were covering the exact same scenes, producing almost identical content to Jeremy. And not only that, in local media reporting on Jeremy's incarceration, they often embedded videos of what he shot that landed him in jail. So, I mean, that's just, it seems like totally bizarre. But I mean, we are more generally heading towards a situation where, under national security legislation in Western countries, even things which are floating around on the internet, or things that are quote unquote open source, it can be a crime to report on them. Or amplify them, or publicize them, or even talk about them. I mean, I think in Jeremy's case, that the grey zone has, since the genocide in Gaza began, I mean, if I do say so myself, as the head of their UK desk, I think they've been leading the charge, yes, in terms of exposing the Zionist entities, like genocide and the abuses against Palestinians. Jeremy was, I mean, he has a bigger pair on him than I, in terms of the places that he was going to and willing to, charge headfirst into to get the raw story, and also some of the people he spoke to as well. I mean, there are some, you can check out some of his films for the Grey Zone, which are, I mean, absolutely extraordinary, where he talks to settlers, Zionist settlers, who are blocking the path of aid trucks who are trying to get aid into Gaza, and Israeli settlers openly boasting about how they have a God-given right to this land and they're going to make the Palestinians starve to death. Like, I mean, in a time of universal lies, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. What Jeremy was doing, and I think the Grey Zone has been doing, is extremely dangerous to so many long-standing narratives about the kind of state Israel is and what it is actually doing. I mean, admittedly, that they're kind of doing our job for us in terms of their biblically influenced public statements about the need to eradicate Gentiles and all sorts of other claims to be on a God-sent mission to conquer the lands comprising Lebanon. But yeah, I mean, Israel has as my dear friend Alex Rubenstein and I discussed on Wednesday evening on our show Active Measures, Israel has a long-standing policy of attempting to kill journalists. Figures compiled by an organization called Zionism Observer suggest that they may have killed 200 journalists this year alone, and in most cases these are people who wear jackets clearly identifying themselves as press, and helmets too. Usually in war zones, that is a very clear sign to warring factions to leave this person alone. No, they've been systematically gunned down. There was a dear friend of most Palestinian journalists, Wafa al-Adayni, who was killed along with her entire family in a targeted IOF airstrike, and she had been, like so many other Palestinian truth teller has been receiving calls in the lead up to this, threatening her with certain death. She didn't stop what she was doing, and she carried on going. So no prizes for guessing why it is her entire family was murdered by the IOF.
Yeah. Yes. And again, yes, I think that the gray zone, and I regularly try to give as much credit as humanly possible. As everybody knows, I love journalists, and I don't mean you know, the Chris Hayes and Rachel Maddows of the world. I mean, actual journalists, people like Jeremy, who are not afraid to go to the places that they're reporting on, put themselves in actual physical danger in order to bring us the stories and the information that we are not getting from our own mainstream media. And that's exactly what Jeremy has done. And, you know, the gray zone has led the way, and has for a long time on Israel. This is not a new subject matter for Max or Aaron, or, you know, this is something, or Anya. This is something that they've been covering for a very long time. But I think in particular, since October 7th, they've really stepped up their game. I do just really quickly want to shout out Max's recent documentary. For those of you who have not seen it yet, he just recently released a documentary. I'm going to pull up, whoops, wrong one. It's called Atrocity Inc., How Israel Sells the Destruction of Gaza. So you can find that on the Gray Zone News. You can also find it on Max's Twitter timeline as well. Go and watch this. It's only 45 minutes long. It does a really good job of getting a lot of information out in a very concise and easy to digest. And I mean, listen, it's not easy subject matter. This is not going to be, you know, a rom-com. This is going to be a difficult watch, but it is very important, I think, for people to go and educate themselves, and also share this, because you have, I'm sure everybody understands, this will get hit by the algorithm. This will be really difficult. I don't know why that's not, did that even come up? No. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think
here we go.
Sorry, go ahead.
No.
I mean, no, yeah. I was going to say as well that there is another excellent movie on the Israeli occupation, which is narrated by Roger Waters, which has just come out, and they're supporting Max's work as well. That is, again, not a light watch, but it's amazingly insightful. And yeah, I mean, I think there is a wider pattern here as well of brutal crackdowns on Palestine solidarity voices and independent journalists. Like, I mean, in the UK, in the past few weeks alone, first Richie Medhurst, who's a very popular independent journalist who ran for Parliament in the UK's most recent election and did not too shabbily on a pro-Palestinian independent platform. He was arrested coming off a plane in Heathrow a few weeks back, was held in detention for 24 hours with, again, limited access to the outside world, and without really being told why he was being held or what he'd done wrong. And he was then released, but is on bail and has to return to the UK. I think it's next month. And I mean, that's I myself was stopped under this and had a very similar experience to Richie in May of 2023. There was a team of armed counter-terror police waiting for me on the runway in Luton, and I was then grilled without right to silence for 6 hours on everything from whether how much I pay in rent in Serbia to my political opinions, and all sorts of questions about my personal finances and the Grey Zone's non-existent relationship with Russia's FSB. But yeah, which was no fun. I mean, the last contact I had with them, they said that I was still under criminal investigation. So I don't think I'll be returning to London anytime soon. But Richie, yes, is under bail and has to return. Yes, as I say, I think it's next month. Sarah Wilkinson, a very prominent pro-Palestine journalist, a middle-aged woman, had her front door kicked in by hooded counter-terror thugs in the UK and had all of her devices seized, and then was released with bail conditions that included not using a phone or the internet. So quite how she was expected to do any work at all or function as a human being in the 21st century is not clear. But there was, despite the fact that the mainstream media, of course, went nowhere near this, there was an explosion of outrage from independent activists, journalists, concerned citizens, and those bail conditions have, the appalling draconian bail conditions have now been dropped. So again, disturbing, but mild cause for optimism always.
Yeah, no, I think that there is always cause for optimism. I think in particular, just now, as we've seen with the outcry with Jeremy, I think I wasn't expecting him to be released, frankly. I thought for sure we were going to see him languish in jail for some time until there was some sort of a formal trial or something like that. And so the idea that he has been ordered to be released, obviously he's still, the coast is not clear, but I think that the fact that he's been released from jail shows that, you know, we can fight these things if we're loud enough. Do you know if anybody's spoken to him? Is he doing okay?
Yeah, I mean, updates are few and far between, and
Yeah.
I've mainly emanated from his attorneys, who are excellent actually,
Yeah.
and they argued very persuasively in court that what Jeremy was doing was in line with what other media outlets were doing. But I mean, I think that I mean, as you say, like I genuinely, when those official charges were leveled, I mean, that's very, very serious, and you've got to bear in mind that like the Israel acts with total impunity anyway. Like it was no doubt calculated that this wouldn't cause too much of an outcry, and they could move against him in that manner. I mean, yeah, like you've got to bear in mind that not long ago there was a US citizen was shot in the head by the IDF in the West Bank, and the IDF, despite Biden saying there needs to be full accountability for what happened, the IDF investigated themselves and concluded that he was shot by accident and it's nobody's fault. And then this has been completely forgotten. Like this is the deliberate murder of a US citizen by the Israeli military. And like there was virtually zero media pushback, and it's just vanished from view, as I'm sure the Israelis hope that Jeremy would. Now, there's another point to make here as well, I think, about like media complicity. So back in June, the Washington Post published this absolutely horrendous, libelous hit job on the Grey Zone, claiming that because Wyatt Reed, who's like a contributor editor at the Grey Zone, because several years ago he did some work for the Press TV, which is an Iranian news network, which he did nothing to hide. He openly promoted and advertised as having done. That it was suggested that he was in receipt of payments from Iran, and this may constitute a criminal offence. But not only that, such is the way that these scum go about their smears. The article very, very, very strongly insinuated, without making a direct accusation, because that would be straight up defamation and provably false, that the Grey Zone is funded by Iran. And ever since, our detractors, the Grey Zone's detractors, have cited that article as proof that we are funded and directed by Iran, and all of our work on Gaza is effectively Iranian propaganda. Now, I mean, myself, Max, Aaron, and Wyatt, and Anya, we are all very, very used at this point to false allegations of working for hostile foreign powers. It's something that you get like almost hourly on Twitter. But like, I think that what made this particularly disturbing was there was an open call in this Washington Post hit job for us to be prosecuted under foreign agent registration laws. Now, in the wake of when news broke of Jeremy's detention in Israel, there was a large number of very prominent Zionist voices. Clearly they were getting briefings, who were saying that, well, Jeremy is an Iranian agent, that the Grey Zone is funded and directed by Iran, therefore he is was clearly acting in the acting as a spy or a wrecker on Iran's explicit behalf. Now, again, I mean, that is very much into life imprisonment and death penalty territory. And we've seen, I mean, with Julian Assange, how easy it is to manufacture consent for someone's egregious criminal detention for the crime of telling the truth, when false accusations of foreign sponsorship and direction are bandied around. I mean, there was a large number of people who, when Julian was heinously dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London back in 2019, who was saying, well, he collaborated with the Russians and got Trump in power.
I still get that.
Therefore, this is justified. This is good that this is happening. And so it set that set alarm bells ringing cacophonously in my head. It was clear there was a concerted effort to try and justify this. I mean, again, when I got detained returning to my native UK back in May last year, there was a huge initial pushback, including official statements from the National Union of Journalists issued in my favour. Then there was a kind of reverse pushback, where there was a large number of prominent voices, including the great many people who are powerful people I've pissed off over the years, personally, who were saying this is justified. Kit's not a journalist; he's something else, etc. And then that seemed to be somewhat successful in dampening sympathy for me. And the NUJ rather infamously removed their statement in solidarity with me, because they were being pressured. They were being pressured by state assets. But yeah, I mean, so I think this is this. If in the hopeful event that Jeremy is released without charge and free to return to his native US in a manner of days, I think this would have been very much like a lucky escape in many ways, and although it's not so lucky, because what happened was a large number of people all over the world registered their disgust and anger and were made clear they weren't going to let this drop. That's certainly I think a victory for people power.
For sure. But I also think that people need to be, and I hate to, I mean, I guess I don't hate to sound like a broken record, because apparently I have to keep saying it. This is not new. This is, as you just mentioned, Julian Assange. It didn't even start with Julian Assange. Obviously, that was the most egregious case. This was a man who was held for over a decade, subjected to psychological torture and physical torture. This dragged out for so long, and that created a chilling effect. This is going to create a chilling effect. This is going to cause other journalists who would otherwise be willing to go to Israel and report on the truth will not do so now, because they're afraid of what happened to Jeremy. And that's really the goal here. This is, and I've been screaming about this for years, and I'm not the only one. I'm not patting myself on the back here. Lots of people have been talking about this. This really is a global war on journalism, on truth, really. They're trying to criminalize the truth. They are, and this whole uptick of we're protecting you from misinformation, that's a load of horse shit. They're not protecting you from misinformation. They are protecting themselves from the truth. That is what's happening here. And that's what's so frustrating about this. And we've seen the way, I mean, you mentioned Sarah and Richard. Craig Murray's another great example. We've seen the way that this has begun to escalate, and it's really a global situation. We see the way that RT and Sputnik are under attack currently. This is a real issue. And if that's why I'm glad that yesterday we saw such a massive outcry from so many people. That was really, because it was so hard for so long to get people to speak for Julian, seeing people so willing and to easily speak for Jeremy was really heartwarming to me. And it made me, we really made a lot of progress in that aspect. So again, thank you to everybody who did that. For sure.
Yeah, I know, genuinely, thank you. And I think as well that yesterday provides a very clear example, I think, of I know for a fact that there were a great many people who do not share my politics and did not share Jeremy's, who were ringing up regardless, on the basis of principle. Right. And I think this is really, really, really important, because we have had years of ideological purity tests, which has torn the left apart in so many different ways. And who does that benefit? Divide and rule, and it's just like that. Actually, I think that people often forget that we are individually, but particularly collectively, a lot more powerful than we give ourselves credit for. Now, another great example. I mean, you want to talk about the internationalization of censorship and suppression and persecution of inconvenient truths and truth tellers, right? It's somewhat forgotten now, but I think it was around 2 years ago, the Department of Homeland Security in the US or was it last year? They attempted to no, I think it was 2 years ago. They attempted to launch something called the Disinformation Governance Board, led by this awful woman Nina Jankovic, who like had a history of like endorsing the Steele dossier and like calling Julian Assange a Russian agent, and also libeling the grey zone as Kremlin assets. And I mean, and who was, yes, rather infamously made this TikTok video in which she's singing to the tune of Mary Poppins. And it's like, I think that like hell is having to just watch that over and over and over again with your Clockwork Orange with your eyes peeled. But anyway, the point is that it is very clear that this was intended to operate as a state censorship mechanism, which would state, right, well, this fact or this perspective or this information is disinformation, therefore it needs to be banned, and potentially the people amplifying it and publishing it prosecuted. It is very clear that this is what they were moving towards, and it was launched with enormous fanfare, and there was a massive pushback again across the political spectrum. There were digital rights groups who made noises about this. There were people on the left who expressed grave concerns, given her personal and professional, Jankovic's personal and professional background, about what this thing was intended to do. And within about, it might have been less than 6 weeks, they shut it down and it was completely off the agenda. They were moving, but they were moving very quickly towards that. And without that pushback and without that outcry, I think that we would be living in a very different world now. I have written about, there is a very shadowy British government department called the DSMA Committee. That's the Defence and Security Media Advisory Committee. They effectively dictate what, it's run by the Ministry of Defence, MI5 and MI6, which is Britain's foreign and domestic intelligence services, and they dictate what can be reported on and how on matters of national security. Now, in theory, this is just advisory, so they can't like legally force you to not publish information, but journalists know that there are going to be consequences if they don't comply. So it's never been broken, this system. So they write to the heads of major newspapers and say, oh, this story has broken or is about to break, and we would really prefer it if you'd be so kind as to just not say anything about it. Yeah, be a good sport. And then journalists comply 100% of the time. The Edward Snowden leaks in 2013, the entire British media ignored it. This was like a global story which was reported in every corner of the world, and the British media, with the exception of The Guardian, didn't acknowledge its existence. This like kind of generational scandal of mass spying by GCHQ and the NSA, right? So that's how effective it is. They pulled the same trick with WikiLeaks a couple of years earlier. I think it was the Afghan war logs they managed to just completely censor in the British media. But yeah, the point is that the DSMA, it has been reported, and I've written about this, that they are trying to push their model of advisory, do this or else censorship to Twitter and, well, or now X, and also all sorts of digital media, including search engines. And you know, this is like this is a British government operation which seems to think that it has a right to police speech globally, and they are currently pressuring the heads of major tech firms to sign up to the committee. So then when something goes viral that they don't like, they can speak to the heads of these organizations and just have it removed and suppressed so people can't know it. And there are records of DSMA meetings openly published where they explicitly talk about how they have told journalists to not report on things that are all over Twitter, have been reported in foreign media. Okay, so this is, again, ties in with Jeremy. What Jeremy was doing was being done by PBS quote unquote journalists on the ground, by Israeli journalists, the exact same scenes, and he is being penalized and was facing prosecution under the most draconian national security laws in the entire world. But they weren't. It was similar with when Craig Murray got sent to prison for contempt of court for reporting on the trial of Alex Salmond. He reported on information which the mainstream media also reported on, but he was prosecuted successfully and then jailed for 6 months for publicizing this information. And the judge, in her summing up, said, well, independent journalists need to be held to higher standards than the mainstream media and face more severe penalties because reasons.
Yeah. Yes, and they did the same thing with WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks
Yes.
worked with 5 major global publications to publish that information. The only person who was ever facing prosecution was Julian Assange. It's very bizarre to me. And in fact, some of those publications published things before WikiLeaks even did. So that's exactly how they get around this stuff. They pick and choose who they want to prosecute. And we know the way that the mainstream media is fully in the pocket of these people. This is not new. I mean, John Stockwell talked about it years ago. They have complete control over the mainstream media. They own the mainstream media. And WikiLeaks, in fact, revealed in the 2016 leaks that, there's dozens of mainstream journalists who were having off-the-record meetings with Hillary Clinton's campaign. They were going to dinner parties. Glenn Thrush very famously sent an article to the Hillary Clinton campaign prior to publishing and said, listen, I realize that this makes me a hack, but if you want to read this over and make any necessary changes before I published it, you just let me know. I mean, that's what we're dealing with in mainstream press. So that's why it is so vital to stand up for people like Jeremy, like Grayzone, who are actually going out there and doing adversarial journalism, who are looking for truth, who are combating mainstream narratives. I mean, we're close to losing all of that. They really do want full control over the narrative, and they're close to getting it. I mean, it's a terrifying prospect, but the way that this is playing out, it just continues to escalate. So, okay, I don't want to keep you too long. What can we do now, or should we be doing anything? I don't want to hurt Jeremy's situation in any way by, causing any unnecessary uproar or whatever, but should we be continuing to apply pressure? Should we be continuing to email the embassy in Israel? What should we be doing in order to help him the best way that we can moving forward?
Well, I mean, I think just keep drawing attention to what has happened to him, and indeed, other precedents: Richie Medhurst, Craig Murray, Sarah Wilkinson. Let's not forget that this is a state of
yourself.
Threat. But indeed, little old me. Never forget. But we should also, never forget there is more of us than there are them. And that is what they are frightened of, and it's I think that the story of Jeremy's detention is one of a US client which is completely out of control and thinks there are no consequences to its actions, and it thinks nothing of shooting US citizens in the head because they think they can get away with it. Well, we need to be moving as in every direction to a situation where they can't get away with it, or their ability to do so is severely truncated. This. Keep making noise about the mere fact that the US, the Biden administration is continuing to facilitate a 21st century Holocaust in Gaza. Don't stop making noise about this. It's because this is an ongoing reality which dwarfs any other issue. I've been told, heading into, a US election where it's not even really an issue spoken about. And meanwhile, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people across the US and across Europe who are out in the trenches routinely marching, demanding that governments stop facilitating this and stop letting it happen. That Aaron Bushnell, the US soldier who self-immolated in protest of US complicity in the Gaza genocide. Not long before he left us, he wrote a note on Facebook which was, if you ever wonder what you do during the Holocaust, during World War II, you're doing it now, right? Interpret that as you will.
And that's, in the United States, it's not being talked about near enough. I do think that we're seeing a significant amount of pressure being put on the candidates. In Michigan, for example, where there's a lot of Muslim, there's a larger Muslim population. Jill Stein is now polling extremely well. Kamala Harris is suffering tremendously. So we're seeing, it's never enough in the United States. I feel like the United States has been so placated and we're so conditioned to just oh, it's the best we can do. I mean, we've been beaten down to the point where we just accept the absolute most abhorrent behavior from our politicians and think that we can't do anything about it. But we see some glimmers of hope where people are starting to fight back. And we saw it, for example, Gray Zone contributor Liam Cosgrove recently just called out Matthew Miller. That was fantastic. That guy's got one of the most punchable faces on planet Earth. Oh, that stupid smirk. Oh, I just. But
if he was like some evil character in like a Disney movie, like you think it was like grotesque and unrealistic. It's just like there's something just so unctuous, like just oily about him. Oh,
the evil oozes off of him. Yeah, it's gross.
Yeah, well, it's just like, I mean, and I do think as well that I mean this is another point to bear in mind, is like these people don't like it up. Like these people don't like it when you challenge them to their faces, right? Yeah. So do lots of that. They hate it. So do more of it.
Yeah, no, and that's actually a great point. Somebody on Twitter pointed out that currently members of Congress are home campaigning. That's a great time to show up to a campaign event and start really putting some pressure on these people and start protesting them. And so, I mean, this is a great time right now, y'all. Find out where your local congressman, whatever, find out where they have campaign events going on all the time. They are currently campaigning. Go and disrupt them. Be a Jose Vega. Go and disrupt them. Be loud. Put pressure on them. That's the only way that we can really effectively fight back against this. So obviously, y'all, if you want to, Jeremy's story is not over. Again, he has been released from jail. As Kit mentioned earlier, the cops now have the 10 days to dig into his devices, and who knows what will come from that. We have no idea. I worry that they may try to plant some sort of nefarious evidence there. Who knows? But we have to continue to keep an eye on this and make as much noise about it as possible. Don't stop talking about it just because he's out of jail. Continue to raise awareness about it. Not everybody knows still. So talk about it. Make sure it's known that Israel is arresting and detaining and beating American journalists for the crime of journalism, which is not a crime. So make noise about it. Follow Kit. Kit's been reporting on it extensively and talking about all of the updates on Twitter at Kit Klarenberg. You can follow Max Blumenthal, of course. He's been also reporting out on it extensively. I think Aaron Matei has been doing a great job of trying to keep people updated. So follow those people. Make sure you're staying up to date with the latest on what's going on with him. Continue to make noise about it. Continue to speak for Palestine, obviously. And if anything happens, of significance, I'll make sure to do another show and we'll talk about it some more. But just keep the pressure up, you guys. And we talked about this when Assange, people used to ask me all the time, well, what will you do when Assange is free? Well, the fight doesn't stop. I mean, it doesn't end with Assange. Like, that's just not a thing. Like, we still have to fight for Assange to get pardoned. But it doesn't end there. The fight against journalism, the powerful people don't like their secrets exposed. They don't like their evil exposed. And so there's going to be a continual battle against truth and journalism. And that's going to be a fight. Put your running shoes on. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And when something like this happens, we have to make sure that we are loud and that we are solidified. We need to stand together despite political ideological differences and fight back against this stuff. So just keep an eye on this. We'll make sure to bring you any updates or any additional information as it comes out. So Kit, thank you for joining me to talk about this. Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. I know that you're a busy guy. So thank you for joining me. And again, we will be keeping an eye on this. And if there's anything else that happens, I'll make sure to jump on here and keep you guys informed. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks to everybody in the chat for hanging out with us. And please go and keep tweeting about Palestine and Jeremy and what's happening to him. So we will see you soon. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good one, guys.
Peace out.